Hello, my name is Sophia Martinez, and I'm so excited to share my story with you today. 5 years ago, I couldn't string together a simple sentence in English without freezing up, my palms sweating, and my mind going completely blank. I remember standing in a Starbucks in downtown Chicago, unable to order a simple latte because I was so terrified of mispronouncing something or using the wrong words. The barista smiled at me patiently, but I could feel the line of people behind me growing restless. I ended up pointing at the menu and nodding, leaving that coffee shop feeling embarrassed and defeated. But today I work as a marketing coordinator at a tech company in San Francisco. I lead meetings, give presentations, and I've even done a TEDx talk about immigrant experiences in America. My English isn't perfect, and honestly, it never will be. But I'm fluent, I'm confident, and most importantly, I'm not afraid anymore. I want to tell you about my journey and how I learned to talk in English through 7 specific steps that completely transformed not just my language skills, but my entire life. These aren't the steps you'll find in a traditional textbook. These are real, practical strategies that worked for me, a girl who moved to the United States from a small town where English was just something we studied in school, never something we actually spoke. If you're struggling with English right now, if you understand it when you read but can't seem to get the words out when you speak, if you're tired of feeling invisible because you can't express yourself, I see you. I was you. And I promise you, there's hope. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let me tell you my story. Step 1. I stopped studying English and started living it. When I first arrived in the United States at 22, I did what most people do. I bought English grammar books. Lots of them. I downloaded apps like Duolingo and Babbel. I made flashcards with vocabulary words. I spent hours every evening sitting at my tiny desk in my shared apartment in Queens, New York, conjugating verbs and memorizing irregular plurals. And you know what? My English didn't improve. Not in any way that mattered. Sure, I could tell you the past participle of to bring. It's brought, by the way. But when my roommate asked me if I wanted to grab pizza for dinner, I'd stare at her like a deer in headlights. The gap between what I knew on paper and what I could actually say was enormous. The turning point came about 3 months into my American life. I was working at a dry cleaning shop in Manhattan, and my boss, Mrs. Chen, noticed me studying during my lunch break. She looked at my grammar book and shook her head. "Sophia," she said in her accented English, "you want to learn English? Stop reading that book and start talking to people." I was terrified. "But I'll make mistakes," I protested. "Good," she said. "Mistakes mean you're trying. No mistakes mean you're hiding." That conversation changed everything for me. I realized that I'd been treating English like a subject to master rather than a tool to use. I was so focused on being perfect that I'd forgotten the whole point of language, communication. So I made a decision. I put away my grammar books. I deleted most of my language learning apps, and I started living in English instead of just studying it. What did that look like practically? Instead of reviewing vocabulary lists on the subway, I started listening to people's conversations. I went to the same coffee shop every morning and chatted with the barista about the weather, about my weekend plans, about anything. At first, I used simple sentences. "Today is sunny." "I like this coffee." My apartment is small. I joined a community garden in my neighborhood, not because I was passionate about gardening, but because I knew people would be there, talking, and I could practice. I volunteered at a local food bank on Saturdays. I said yes to every social invitation from my coworkers, even when I wanted to hide at home. Was it uncomfortable? Absolutely. Did I make mistakes? Every single day. But here's what happened. I started actually communicating. And communication, messy and imperfect as it was, built my confidence in a way that no textbook ever could. The lesson I learned was this. You can't learn to swim by reading about swimming. You have to get in the water. English is the same way. You have to stop preparing to speak and start speaking, even if you're not ready, even if you mess up, even if it feels scary. Step 2. I found my English-speaking tribe. About 6 months into my journey, I was feeling pretty good about my progress. I could handle basic conversations at work and in stores, but I noticed something frustrating. Whenever I went home to my apartment, I slipped back into Spanish with my roommates. It was comfortable, easy, and it felt like a relief after a long day of struggling with English. But it was also holding me back. I realized that if I was serious about becoming fluent, I needed to surround myself with English speakers, not just at work or in passing, but in my daily life, with people I genuinely connected with. So I did something that scared me to death. I moved out of my apartment with the Spanish-speaking roommates and found a place with 3 American girls who were looking for a 4th person to share a house in Brooklyn. I still remember the interview. I sat in their living room, my hands shaking, trying to explain why I wanted to live there. I want to improve my English, I said honestly. I want to be part of a community where I have to speak English every day. They looked at each other, and one of them, her name was Rachel, smiled. We'd love to have you, she said. But you have to promise to correct us if we ever make you feel left out, okay? Living with them was one of the best decisions I ever made. Suddenly, English wasn't just something I used at work. It was how I talked about dinner plans, how I negotiated who was going to clean the bathroom, how I shared stories about my day. It was how I laughed, how I complained, how I connected. But finding my tribe wasn't just about roommates. I also joined a book club at the local library. Yes, reading in English was hard. Yes, I had to look up words on every single page, but sitting in that circle of women every other Thursday evening, discussing characters and plot twists and what we thought about the ending, that pushed me in ways I never expected. I joined a hiking group through meetup.com. I started taking a pottery class at a community center. I didn't do these things because I loved pottery or hiking, though I discovered I actually did. I did them because they gave me contexts where I had to speak English about things that mattered to me. Here's what I learned. You need people who will speak English with you regularly, people who will be patient with your mistakes, but won't switch to your native language to make things easier. You need native speakers who will expose you to natural English, the idioms, the slang, the way people actually talk, not the way textbooks say they talk. But you also need fellow English learners. Some of my best practice partners were other immigrants. We made mistakes together, we encouraged each other, and we didn't judge each other the way we feared native speakers might. Finding your tribe isn't about abandoning your culture or your first language. It's about creating spaces where English is the default, where you have to use it, where using it becomes natural and automatic. Step 3. I embraced my accent and stopped apologizing. This step was probably the hardest for me emotionally, but it was also the most liberating. I have an accent, a noticeable one. When I say beach, it sometimes sounds like bitch. I roll my R's. I emphasize the wrong syllables. And for the longest time, I hated it. I felt like my accent was a neon sign announcing to everyone that I was an outsider, that I didn't belong. I remember one particularly painful moment about a year into my time in the States. I was at a company happy hour, trying to tell a story, and I mispronounced the word focus. Everyone at the table kind of paused, and then one guy, I'll never forget this, said, "That's cute," in this condescending way, like I was a child. I was mortified. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 10 minutes. I almost quit my job that night because I couldn't face the thought of speaking in English ever again. But then something happened that changed my perspective entirely. I was watching TV, flipping channels, and I stopped on a late-night talk show. The guest was Penelope Cruz, the Spanish actress. And there she was, speaking English with a thick Spanish accent, confident and charismatic, joking with the host, telling stories, completely at ease. The host wasn't making fun of her accent. He was engaged with what she was saying. I realized something in that moment. Penelope Cruz is an international movie star. She's done movies in English, won awards, worked with the biggest directors in Hollywood, and she still has an accent. Her accent didn't stop her from achieving anything. Then I started noticing accents everywhere. Arnold Schwarzenegger, one of the most famous action stars in American cinema, has a strong Austrian accent. Sofia Vergara built an entire career in American television with her Colombian accent. Countless successful people in the United States speak English with accents from all over the world. The problem wasn't my accent. The problem was my attitude about my accent. So I made a decision. I would stop apologizing for how I spoke. I would stop starting sentences with, "Sorry, my English is bad." I would stop being embarrassed when I made a mistake. Instead, I would focus on what I was saying, not how I was saying it. Was this easy? No, it required a complete mental shift. Every time I caught myself feeling ashamed of how I sounded, I had to actively remind myself, my accent is part of my story. It shows that I'm brave enough to speak a language that isn't my first language. It shows that I'm bilingual, which is actually pretty impressive. I also started seeking out content from non-native English speakers who were successful in their fields. I watched TED Talks by speakers with accents. I listened to podcasts hosted by immigrants. I followed social media accounts of people who spoke English beautifully, but not perfectly. Here's the truth. Native English speakers care way less about your accent than you think they do. Most people are focused on understanding your message, not judging your pronunciation. And the people who do judge you? Those aren't your people anyway. Your accent is not a weakness. It's evidence of your courage, your adaptability, your willingness to step outside your comfort zone. Embrace it. Step 4. I learned English through stories, not words. Around my second year in the United States, I hit a plateau. I could handle everyday conversations. I could do my job, but I felt like I wasn't getting any better. My vocabulary felt limited. I used the same words over and over. I wanted to express more complex ideas, but I didn't know how. I was venting about this to my friend Rachel, my former roommate, and she said something interesting. Sophia, you're thinking about English wrong. You're trying to collect words like they're baseball cards. But that's not how language works. Language is about stories. I didn't understand what she meant at first, so she explained, when you learn a word in isolation, it's hard to remember and hard to use. But when you learn a word as part of a story, it sticks. You remember the context, the emotion, the situation, and then you can use it in similar situations. She suggested I start reading fiction, novels, short stories, anything with characters and plots. Don't just read for vocabulary, she said. Read for the story. Get invested in the characters. Feel what they feel, and you'll absorb the language naturally. So I started with young adult novels because they were easier to read than adult fiction. I read The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, and I cried at the ending. I read the Hunger Games series and got completely hooked on the plot. I read Eleanor and Park and remembered what it felt like to be young and in love. And Rachel was right. I wasn't just learning words. I was learning how English worked in context. I learned how people express emotions, how they have arguments, how they flirt, how they comfort each other. I learned idioms naturally because characters used them in situations where their meaning was clear, but I didn't stop with books. I also started watching TV shows, not with subtitles in my native language, but with English subtitles or no subtitles at all. I watched Friends and learned how Americans joke with each other. I watched The Office and picked up workplace humor. I watched This Is Us and learned how families talk about difficult emotions. Listened to storytelling podcasts like The Moth and This American Life. I heard real people telling real stories about their lives, and I learned how to structure narratives, how to build suspense, how to deliver a punchline. The key was that I stopped treating English like a list of words to memorize and started treating it like a living thing that existed in contexts, in stories, in human experiences. And here's the amazing part. When I learned language through stories, I didn't just improve my vocabulary, I improved my ability to connect with people. I could tell better stories myself. I could understand cultural references. I could participate in conversations about books, shows, and movies that everyone else was talking about. When someone at work mentioned a scene from Game of Thrones, I knew what they were talking about. When my friend made a joke referencing Parks and Recreation, I got it. I wasn't just learning English. I was learning American culture, and that made me feel less like an outsider. If you want to become fluent in English, immerse yourself in stories. Read books that make you feel something. Watch shows that make you laugh or cry. Listen to people tell their stories, and then start telling your own stories in English. Language isn't about memorizing definitions. It's about sharing human experiences, and stories are how we do that. Step 5. I started thinking in English. This step sounds weird, but it was absolutely crucial to my fluency. For the first 2 years of speaking English, I was constantly translating in my head. Someone would say something in English, I'd translate it to Spanish in my mind to understand it, then formulate a response in Spanish, then translate that back to English before I spoke. This process was exhausting and slow, and it made conversations feel like work. I remember having coffee with Rachel one day, and I was telling her about this problem. Mid-sentence, I paused for a long time, trying to figure out how to say something, and she could see me struggling. "You're translating, aren't you?" she asked. I nodded, frustrated with myself. "You need to start thinking in English," she said. "I know that sounds impossible, but it's the only way to become truly fluent. You need to cut out the middleman," I laughed. "How do I do that? I can't just decide to think in a different language." "Actually," she said, "you kind of can. It takes practice, but you can train your brain to do it." So I started small. I began narrating my daily activities in my head in English. When I was making breakfast, I'd think, "I'm cracking eggs. I'm whisking them with a fork. I'm pouring them into the pan." When I was getting dressed, I'd think, "I'm putting on jeans. These jeans are comfortable. I like the color." It felt ridiculous at first, like I was a character in a movie doing voiceover narration, but gradually it became more natural. I started thinking in English without having to force it. I also started keeping a journal entirely in English. Every night before bed, I'd write about my day, what I did, what I thought about, what I felt. I didn't worry about grammar or perfect sentences. I just let the English flow out of me without filtering it through Spanish first. Another thing that helped was setting my phone and all my devices to English. Every notification, every app, every setting was in English. This meant I was constantly engaging with the language, even in small ways, throughout the day. I also started talking to myself in English. When I was alone in my apartment, I'd have conversations with myself, practicing how I might explain something to a coworker or how I might tell a story to a friend. Yes, I probably looked crazy, but it worked. The turning point came about 6 months into this practice. I was at a party talking with a group of people and someone asked me a question. I answered immediately, naturally, without any pause. And then I realized I hadn't translated. I had thought in English, and the English had just come out. It felt like magic. It felt like freedom. When you think in English, several things happen. First, you become faster. You don't have that lag time between hearing and responding. Second, you become more natural. Your sentence structure starts to follow English patterns instead of your native language patterns. Third, you become less exhausted. Speaking English stops being such hard work. Here's my advice for training your brain to think in English. Start with simple narration of your daily activities. Keep a journal in English, talk to yourself in English when you're alone, and immerse yourself in English media so much that English becomes a constant presence in your mind. It won't happen overnight. It took me months of consistent practice, but when it finally clicked, it changed everything. Step 6. I stopped being afraid of making mistakes. If I could go back and give myself one piece of advice when I first started learning to speak English fluently, it would be this: fail faster. I spent so much time being afraid of making mistakes that I robbed myself of countless opportunities to practice and improve. I stayed quiet in meetings because I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I avoided social situations because I was afraid of embarrassing myself. I said I don't know to questions I actually knew the answer to because I was afraid my English wouldn't be good enough. Fear was my biggest obstacle, bigger than any lack of vocabulary or grammar knowledge. The shift happened for me during a presentation at work. I was about 3 years into my English-speaking journey, and my manager asked me to present our quarterly marketing results to the entire company. I was terrified. I almost said no, but something in me decided to go for it. I prepared extensively. I practiced my presentation probably 50 times. I wrote everything down word for word. And then the day came. About 5 minutes into my presentation, I made a mistake. I meant to say, "We saw growth in customer retention," but instead I said, "We saw growth in customer attention." It didn't even make sense. I froze. My face turned red. And then someone in the audience raised their hand and said, "Did you mean retention?" I nodded, corrected myself, and kept going. And you know what happened? Nothing. No one laughed at me. No one thought I was stupid. The presentation continued, and afterward, several people came up to tell me I'd done a great job. My mistake was just a tiny blip in an otherwise successful presentation. That experience taught me something crucial. Mistakes aren't catastrophic. They're just part of the learning process. Native English speakers make mistakes all the time, too. They use the wrong word. They mispronounce things. They have to correct themselves. It's normal. After that, I decided to reframe how I thought about mistakes. Instead of seeing them as failures, I started seeing them as data points. Each mistake was information about what I still needed to work on. Each mistake was proof that I was pushing myself outside my comfort zone. I started a mistake journal, where I wrote down errors I made and the corrections. Not to beat myself up, but to learn from them. I'd write things like, "I said I am boring," when I meant I am bored. Remember, boring describes the thing. Bored describes how you feel about it. I also started asking people to correct me. I'd say to my friends, "If I say something wrong, please tell me. I want to learn." Most people were happy to help, and they did it kindly. Here's something important I learned. Most communication is about conveying meaning, not about perfect grammar. If someone understands what you're trying to say, you've succeeded, even if your sentence structure wasn't textbook perfect. I stopped apologizing every time I made a mistake. Instead of saying, "Sorry, my English is so bad," I'd just correct myself and move on. I mean retention, not attention, and continue with what I was saying. No big deal. I also gave myself permission to ask for help. If I didn't know a word, I'd describe what I meant and ask, "What's the word for that?" People were almost always happy to help, and I learned vocabulary much more effectively this way than by looking up words in a dictionary. The fear of making mistakes keeps so many people from ever becoming fluent. They wait until they're ready, until they're good enough, until they can speak perfectly. But that day never comes. You become fluent by speaking imperfectly over and over until it becomes perfect. Or at least good enough. Give yourself permission to be bad at English while you're learning. Give yourself permission to sound foolish, to stumble over words, to have to start sentences over. That's not a sign that you're failing. That's a sign that you're learning. Step 7. I committed to speaking English. Every single day, the final step in my journey was consistency. This is the least glamorous step, but it might be the most important. Language fluency isn't about occasional bursts of effort. It's not about studying intensely for a week and then taking a break. It's about showing up every single day. Even when you don't feel like it, even when you're tired, even when you're discouraged, I made a commitment to myself. I would speak English every day, no exceptions. Some days that meant having long conversations. Other days, when I was exhausted or busy, it meant just chatting with the barista at my coffee shop or calling a friend for a 5-minute catch-up. The key was that I didn't let a day go by without using English in a real conversation. Not just consuming English by reading or listening, but actually speaking it, producing it, using my voice. I also joined a conversation exchange program where I was paired with a native English speaker who wanted to learn Spanish. We'd meet once a week for an hour. 30 minutes in English, 30 minutes in Spanish. This gave me a guaranteed weekly practice session with someone who was invested in helping me improve. On days when I couldn't meet up with anyone in person, I used apps like HelloTalk to have text and voice conversations with people around the world. The technology made it easy to practice even when my schedule was crazy. But here's the thing about consistency. It's not just about quantity. It's about showing up regularly enough that English becomes a habit, a part of your daily routine, something your brain expects to do every day. Think about it like exercise. If you go to the gym once a month, you won't get fit. But if you go 3 times a week every week for months, you'll see real results. Language learning is the same. Small, consistent practice beats occasional intense study sessions every time. I kept a simple tracker, just a calendar where I put a check mark every day I had a real English conversation. Seeing those check marks accumulate was motivating. I didn't want to break my streak. There were days when it was hard. Days when I was homesick and just wanted to curl up and speak Spanish with my family on the phone. Days when I was so tired that the thought of forming English sentences made me want to cry. Days when I felt like I wasn't making any progress at all, but I kept showing up. And over time, the consistency paid off in ways I couldn't have imagined. English stopped being something I did and became something I was. It became part of my identity. I didn't just speak English. I was an English speaker. Now, 5 years later, I sometimes dream in English. I think in English automatically. I've even started to forget some Spanish words because I use them so infrequently. My mom is not happy about that, by the way. Looking back on my journey from that scared girl who couldn't order coffee to the confident woman I am today, I'm amazed at how much has changed. But I also want to be honest with you. It wasn't easy. There were tears. There were moments when I wanted to give up. There were times when I felt like I would never truly belong, never truly be fluent, never truly sound like I knew what I was doing. But I kept going. And that's what I want you to take away from my story. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have a flawless accent. You don't have to know every word in the dictionary. You just have to be willing to show up, make mistakes, keep trying, and believe that you can do this. Because you can. I promise you, you can. Let me recap the 7 steps that changed my life. Stop studying English and start living it. Language is a tool for communication, not a subject to master in isolation. Get out there and use it, messy and imperfect as it might be. Find your English-speaking tribe. Surround yourself with people who will speak English with you, who will encourage you, who will create contexts where you have to use the language. Embrace your accent and stop apologizing. Your accent is part of your story. It's evidence of your bravery and your bilingual abilities. Own it. Learn English through stories, not words. Immerse yourself in fiction, TV shows, podcasts, and movies. Learn language in context, and you'll absorb it naturally. Start thinking in English. Cut out the translation step. Narrate your daily life in English, journal in English, and train your brain to operate in English directly. Stop being afraid of making mistakes. Mistakes are not failures. They're learning opportunities. Fail faster, ask for help, and give yourself permission to be imperfect. Commit to speaking English every single day. Consistency is everything. Small daily practice will transform your fluency over time. Today, I live a life I couldn't have imagined when I first arrived in the United States. I have a career I love. I have friends from all over the world. I've traveled to places I only dreamed about. I've told my story on stages in front of hundreds of people, and none of it would have been possible if I hadn't found the courage to speak English. Even when I was scared, even when I wasn't ready, even when I didn't think I was good enough, you are good enough. Right now, exactly as you are good enough to start. Your English-speaking journey might look different from mine. You might take different steps, face different challenges, find different solutions, but the core truth remains the same. Fluency comes from courage, consistency, and a willingness to be imperfect. So here's my challenge to you. Stop waiting until you're ready. Start today. Have one English conversation today, even if it's just chatting with someone at the grocery store. Read one chapter of a book in English today. Think in English for 5 minutes today, and then do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Before you know it, you'll look back and realize how far you've come. You'll be telling someone else your story of how you learned to speak English fluently and confidently. I can't wait to hear it. Thank you for letting me share my journey with you. Now go out there and start yours. You've got this. Sophia Martinez,